President Donald Trump has called for one big, beautiful bill to come out of Congress with all of his legislative priorities. That's tax cuts, that's some spending cuts and some spending increases. There's a lot going on there. It's rapidly changing day to day. And someone who's been covering it very closely and very well is Therese Boudreaux. Therese is here to explain it all. Thanks, Therese.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Casey.
Now, I don't want to oversell it. Explaining it all is pretty difficult because if you're trying to keep up with this legislation right now, the numbers, the estimates are changing constantly. They're doing these, over 24-hour markups of the legislation. But let's just take some of the big blocks that are happening right now. What kind of tax cuts or changes to the tax law are we seeing starting to form in this, big legislative agenda for Republicans?
Yeah, so there's a lot of tax cuts and a lot of tax promises that Trump made on the campaign trail that if this bill passes, the giant bill where all of the stuff is put together, it will permanently extend the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So that means that the doubled child tax credit that's $2,000 instead of $1,000, the higher standard deduction for most taxpayers, the qualified business income tax credit, the 20%, and then a bunch of other stuff too, for that's, with more business and things like that. That will all become permanent. And then also there's some temporary 4-year provisions that the House Ways and Means tax bill. They're the ones, the House Ways and Means Committee is the one who puts together the tax portion of this mega bill that's coming out. There are also some temporary provisions, so where they'll temporarily boost the child tax credit by $500. They'll temporarily increase the standard deduction by $1,000 for single filers and $1,500 for joint married filers. So there's a lot of different tax relief initiatives and things that are put in this bill. Additionally, Trump made promises on the campaign trail that he would end taxes on tips and end taxes on overtime pay. Those are also included, but only for 4 years in this package that passed the House Ways and Means Committee and is now on to the House Budget Committee so that they can assemble the House Ways and Means tax portion and the 10 other portions that all make up the policy agenda bill.
Right. So we've got the no tax on tips, no tax on overtime's big, campaign promises that were very popular. We even saw, former Vice President Kamala Harris try to basically adopt the no tax on tips policy after Trump rolled it out. So I think it's a very popular provision. Seems like it's going to make it in the final bill. But how do we pay for all this? Of course, that's the big question. You see a lot of rhetoric coming from Democrats right now about sort of draconian Medicaid cuts and that these are cruel. And but you see others on the right, like House Speaker Mike Johnson, saying they're just returning this to pre-COVID levels or only cutting things for people who don't have children, who are able-bodied people who don't have children. Can you give some insight into, is Medicaid being cut and what kind of cuts are we seeing?
Yeah, Medicaid cuts, if you just said that Medicaid was being cut, that I think would be too simplistic because it is pretty complicated and a lot of it is returning things to pro-COVID spending. So what would happen, there are basically to help finance the Trump tax cuts, although it wouldn't help fully finance them because it's extremely expensive to permanently extend them because of all the lost revenue. A bunch of different committees, like the Ways and Means. So we have House Energy and Commerce, House Committee on Agriculture. They're finding different ways to reduce spending on other programs in the federal government to help offset the tax cuts, right? So House Energy and Commerce, they're in charge of Medicaid, among other things. And they found about $500 billion in savings from reforming and restructuring Medicaid. So this is where the accusations of kicking people off Medicaid rolls and things like that come from. So what the House Energy and Commerce bill, which also passed committee, would do is it would close Medicaid financing loopholes used by states, for one thing. For instance, the state of Illinois will overtax hospitals or other providers of Medicaid, but then it will reimburse like 90% or something. And then they'll file that reimbursement as an expense. And so they'll tell the federal government, hey, we just gave this hospital, let's say they charge them, originally taxed them $10 million and then they give them back $9 million. Like, hey, we lost $9 million, so we need this reimbursed. And then the federal government will do that. So it's kind of like money laundering. So it would close that loophole. And then it would bring Medicaid eligibility requirements basically down to pre-COVID levels. So what we saw happen in the Biden administration in 2022, I believe, was Biden not only did he authorize a 20% increase in Medicaid spending, he also extended Medicaid eligibility to the single, without dependents, able-bodied adults, instead of, the elderly, the disabled, low-income children, pregnant women, the people that Medicaid was originally supposed to serve. So that expansion really ballooned the amount of people who are on these Medicaid rolls, and obviously increased a lot of spending. So by returning by bringing back work requirements for these the expanded class, again, able-bodied people without children, that will probably kick or remove eligibility for some of these people. And hopefully the Republicans are thinking return the Medicaid rolls to pre-COVID levels. And so that would save, again, like hundreds of billions of dollars. So yeah, that's where a lot of this is coming from, because Republicans are saying we're just reforming Medicaid and we're keeping it around for longer. And they're saying, actually, these spending reductions, the reductions in spending this is going to make, will not actually result in an overall cut to Medicaid in the future. Because again, Biden increased the spending by 20%. So even though it's, like $500 billion or something like that is technically being cut, overall Medicaid spending over the next decade will still increase by at least 3% a year. Some people are saying. So again, like I said, it's more complicated than just saying this is cuts to Medicaid. It's really more reform and structuring, and there will definitely be people who are no longer eligible under this plan if it gets implemented, including people who are in the country illegally. Congressional Budget Office estimates that about 1.4 million people who are in the country illegally are receiving Medicaid right now. So that's also something that would change under this bill. So again, it's much more nuanced, I think, than Democrats are saying. But it is true that there are going to be a couple million people at least who are currently eligible due to the Biden era expansion, but will probably no longer be eligible once things change.
Yeah, but I think people are aware that during COVID, we spent a lot of money. But what happened during COVID is it basically became untenable for lawmakers to say no to any additional spending during COVID, because they were accused of being, not compassionate to people struggling during the pandemic, during the economic shutdown. And we saw the deficit, the deficit before COVID never passed $1 trillion a year. And during and after COVID, it's, been over 2 trillion some years. And so we saw this huge rise in spending. It was not just on COVID era programs. It was things like you're describing. So it sounds to me, we're running out of time here, but it sounds to me, Therese, like if a single mom has 3 kids, she's not getting kicked off Medicaid. But if a 25-year-old guy is healthy and doesn't have any kids, he's going to have to get a job basically to get on Medicaid. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what House Speaker Mike Johnson was saying. He'd had some humorous comment about 35-year-olds in their mom's basement are no longer going to be eligible for Medicaid or whatever. So that's what Republicans are aiming for.
Right. Okay. Well, thanks, Therese, for illuminating this very complex situation. We'll be following it closely at thecentersquare.com.